Welcome back to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Manili. In this episode, I am just too excited. I have a guest with me. Her name is Michele Rogers, and she is another. Remember, last podcast we had Lisa on, and she was amazing. And she told us her story about her son, which was incredibly sad. And this is her partner in the Share Project of the people that go out and they tell people and they support people who have lost their loved ones, and not even just lost their loved ones, but if you have a loved one with a substance abuse issues, they do all sorts of different things just to really kind of get out there and say you are not alone. And they get out and into the community and say we are here for you, and we want to support you, and we want to help you. And so, Michele, thank you so much for coming on to this. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And the reason why I'm excited about this conversation is because I think it's such a valuable thing to have people that are willing to talk about the hardest journeys. I am not excited about the situation that brought you here.
Of
I'm
course.
mere, it's I don't want to sound insensitive, but I am excited in the sense that we are here talking about something that I know is going to help a lot of people. And I know you're going to bring that to the table.
Thank you. And that's our mission is just to help people and help them understand that we know what a lonely journey this is. And there are people out there who will love you through it and support you through it.
Yes, absolutely. So I think for this podcast, what would be the best place to kind of kick us off, and I love where we're going, is that moment that your son said, Mom, I have a problem. Can you just
Sure.
share with the audience what
I
was
sure
that like
can.
for you?
I sure can. And I'll start by saying my son was already an adult in
Mhm.
his early 20s, and he was college educated. He owned a home. He was financially on his own. And he called me one day and he said, Mom, I need to talk to you and it's really important. And I said, sure, no problem. And I was running some errands. So I stopped and picked him up, and we were in my car in the Ingalls parking lot. And I stopped my car and he looked at me and he said, Mom, I need to borrow some money. And I was like flabbergasted. I said, what do you mean you need to borrow money? He had never borrowed money from me. And he said, Mom, I can't pay my mortgage. I have a problem.
Oh,
And
wow.
literally when he said that, I it took my breath away. He told me that he had a substance problem. He At that time, his problem was pain pills, mostly oxys and Percocets. He had gone through a sinus surgery
Mm,
and became, that's how his addiction started. But unbeknownst to me, he had been what I call a functioning
mm,
drug addict. And I don't like to use that word, but for the sake of this conversation, I
sure.
will. He was functioning, working, paying bills. And when he came to me, it was because he no longer could function because he had spent all his money. And he told me that he had spent all his money on pills and he needed help. Honestly, Jen, I had no idea. I thought, do I take him to the emergency room? Do I call his family doctor and get her? I was clueless
Well,
and overwhelmed.
and so one of the questions I have in my mind is because this is a little bit like unique, because it sounds like, he was in his 20s, went to college, graduated college, owns a home, out there just doing the adulting life. You're doing your life, right? Now, a lot of times, like when I ask people, I'm like, were there any red flags prior to this, or was it just like out of the blue?
Honestly, it sounds naive. I promise I'm not
Yeah.
naive. It was out of the blue.
Well, well, of
In high
course.
school,
Mhm.
my son got in trouble one time for drinking at a football game. Obviously, we didn't make that big of a deal about it because he was in 11th grade, and not that we could know it. He got punished, but it wasn't really a flag. He didn't have a drinking problem. He did
Right.
not have a substance problem. He was an exceptional athlete. He was an exceptional student. He was very ambitious. When he bought his house, he was only 22 years old, still a college student, and he did it all on his own. There weren't any red flags. So it really took me by surprise. And also, I guess I was a little bit naive because honestly, I thought treatment, once we found out what to do
Mm-hmm.
and we found a treatment program, I honestly thought it was going to be he'll go for 21 days, come home, and he'll be fine.
Well, and of course, why wouldn't you? Because his whole life, as far as like you knew it, he was okay. It's just like all of a sudden, you know. And look, those pain pills, even after the sinus surgery and stuff, they can be physically addicting. Why wouldn't you just think like, hey, he's gonna go in, they're gonna sober him up, or they're gonna clean him up, and he's gonna
Yes.
get out, and his life as he knows it, the normal life, is just going to kind of continue moving on. Why wouldn't you have any other thoughts as
That was
to
our
that?
expectation.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
that
so
was.
what really happened?
So what really happened was he went to treatment and he came back. He went right back into his life, and we thought everything was going smooth when in reality, about a month later, maybe 2 months later, he experienced his first relapse. And
Mm,
it was right back into the same cycle. He went to ADAC, which is in Black Mountain,
mm-hmm.
and then back to treatment. And from there, that started our journey
Mm.
of this cycle that I it is heartbreaking, not just for the family, but for my son. It was devastating for him because he tried so hard,
Right.
but he went through this cycle of getting sick,
Mm,
which a lot of people in recovery get sick
mm-hmm.
because their body becomes so physically dependent on this medication, and going to rehab, getting clean, doing well, getting back into their routine, relaxing, and it's like a vicious cycle. And what happened with my son was the pill, the the cost of buying pills on the street was so high. Every time he relapsed, it seemed like it got worse and worse every time. And it became such an expensive addiction. It was actually a drug dealer that introduced my son to heroin about 2 or 3 years into his addiction. And he said, "Hey, Clay, it's cheaper and you can get it easier," because pills were becoming harder and harder to get because of the crackdown on doctors overprescribing pain pills. And it was easy to get the pain pills at one time because these drug dealers could just doctor shop,
Oh
right, and
yeah.
get these prescriptions. So every time my son would relapse, actually the indicator for me was always stuff started disappearing. And I don't mean my stuff. My son never took anything from me. His own stuff. I would go to his house and his TV would be gone.
You're like, where's your TV?
Where's your TV? His hunting rifle would be gone. His bow would be gone. His fly fishing poles would be gone. And then this was part of this vicious cycle we were in. My husband and I would rush from pawn shop to pawn shop to try to get his stuff back,
Mm,
because some of the stuff like the fly fishing poles and hunting bows, things like that, were sentimental.
mm.
And we would rush and get them. I would hide them. I would swear I wouldn't give them back to him and until he got better, and he would get better. I'd give them back. They would disappear again. And this was a several year cycle that we went through.
And so when as you're going through this cycle, what were some of the questions you were asking yourself during it?
So, I would be dishonest if I didn't say that I questioned myself.
Mhm.
Where did I go wrong? Um, it's very easy to blame yourself if you're the parent,
Mhm.
but I advocate for the message that addiction is not a failure of parenting. It's not even a moral failing on the person's, but it did. Obviously, that was my first, like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
But most of all, Jen, honestly, it was so terribly lonely and it was so painful to go through. I didn't even want to admit it to my own immediate family. Like, how do you tell somebody? And we were at the age where my friends, and I've got lifelong friends and I've got local friends, and this whole social media almost makes it worse
Mm.
because we were at our middle age. My husband and I were reaching middle age, and our friends were either planning college graduations or weddings or even birth of their grandchildren. And I was planning treatment for my son
And running around to the pawn shops trying to get
and running
flies.
around the pawn shops trying to get the
Not
favorite fly fishing pole back.
not what you had kind of envisioned your life being when you thought about having a son grow up, do the college thing, go live out of the world. We're anticipating, having the grandkids and just,
He had a serious girlfriend. They had been together for 5 years. They were planning a family. I felt like until substance hit my family, I felt like we were checking off all the boxes.
mm,
And this was a kid who wrote a business plan for, he wanted to open a fly fishing shop and tour. He wanted to be like a tour guide in Western North Carolina for fly fishing. And that was his business plan when he was at Western Carolina University. Like, this was a kid who was checking off his own boxes, let alone me checking off his
right.
boxes. So it was really a disruption to our whole world. And lonely is really the word I always use, because I would run into people, whether they were old friends of mine, old friends of his, teachers. And of course, everybody knew that Clay owned a house here, but nobody saw Clay. And it's a
Right.
small town, right?
So
So I'd run into people.
How's Clay doing?
100% that question. How's Clay? And immediately I would literally, it would take my breath. How am I going to answer it this time? And
Mhm.
I always gave a pretty standard answer, which was, oh, he moved to South Carolina to live closer to his dad. Most of Clay's friends and our friends knew that his dad was active duty Army and moved around. And that was always kind of an easy out for me. I could just say, oh, he moved to the coast to live by his dad, or because how do you say he's in
Mm.
treatment? Because now he's gone from pills to heroin. How do you interject that in a conversation in a social setting?
How do you? Right? How do
It's
you?
hard.
And how do
It's
you?
hard.
How do you? Because it's like, this is something like when I'm working with families, because this is like the most dreaded question they have. They're like, I hate this question. I hate running into people I know. They almost want to like, they see someone in the grocery store and they know they're going to ask, They say, "Oh, I want to turn my cart right around just so I don't have to look at
100%.
it."
Absolutely.
Right?
And, I don't know if it's just because of my work through the Share Project, my passion for advocacy, but
Mhm.
now I have no shame in it. And it's not, I was never ashamed of my son.
Right.
I never gave up hope in my son. I never lost faith. I was sad. I was
Mhm.
sad that he was sick. I was sad that I couldn't help him. I I will share with you that I am what I have learned is called a helicopter mom. I was that hovering mom. I was probably a little overbearing with my two boys. I raised two boys. I was involved in their life, whether it was helping with their baseball teams or being on the PTA, or I knew it all. I knew all their friends. I knew their friends' parents. I knew what they were doing. And this was the first time in my son Clay's life that I felt out of control. I
Mm.
had no control over that situation. And that was devastating to me.
And so when you think about that situation, because you had brought up something important, you said you didn't have any shame towards him.
Mm-mm.
What was there shame, and what kind of was it for you?
So as I mentioned previously, there were times of me questioning where did I go wrong as his mom?
Mm.
Because I was the primary care. My ex-husband, his dad and I divorced when the kids were young. We did co-parent very well, but I was the primary caregiver of the children. They lived with me. So obviously I felt like people would judge me and they would judge my son. And the mama bear in me didn't want people judging my son. I was
Mm.
more worried about him being judged than me being judged. And it was just a struggle. It was
Mm.
a struggle on how to navigate those waters because there's no handbook for it. There's not a book that says how to take care of your child that's addicted to drugs. Maybe there
Right.
is. I didn't read it.
Right. Well, and they're really, I mean, nothing there may be, like you said, but it's really hard to either find one that's um so one of the things that I've done a lot of reading in this field, right? Just so
Mhm.
I could have a handbook to hand to families, right? Because it's like I want
Sure.
to give you the handbook, so I wanted to go find it, right? And what I found is there's all sorts of various different things and a lot of really great information. There's a lot of really good educational pieces out there.
There are, but you know what I found is you might have one therapist or author or doctor tell you to do it this way and another this way. Like some may say, try the tough love, that's what works. And we've all heard they have to hit rock bottom. They won't get help unless they hit rock bottom. And then you've got those that say you've got to meet them where they are and be gentle. And it's all so confusing.
It is, and that's exactly what I was going to say is when I go through it, I'm like, how is anyone going to feel like they have confidence in any of their decisions with all of the things that, and there's so, it's almost like there's too much out there, but not enough about, so what do I do? And when I try this doesn't quite land like I anticipated and what's really going on. And sometimes it's a simple you're doing things that the books tell you to do based on the situation that you think that you're in,
Mhm.
only to find out that maybe there's a whole lot more going on that you don't know about. And so you're not doing things based on the situation that you're actually in. You're doing things based on the situation you think that you're in.
Absolutely. And I this was all a learning process. for me and my husband. And, I have to say, I know as lonely as the journey
Mhm.
was and continues to be, I know I am very blessed and very lucky because I have an amazingly supportive family. I
Mhm.
have an incredible husband he loved my son through it. He's loved me through it, but it's still very lonely, right?
Mm.
And I didn't really understand addiction.
Right.
And my only experience was I have had family members in my past that struggle with alcoholism. I didn't really understand alcoholism that much because I was a child. I didn't really understand drug addiction. And honestly, I'm ashamed to say this, but it's important for me to say. There was a time more than once, especially like in the second, third year, that
Mhm.
I said to my son, for God's sake, just stop. Like,
Yeah.
how hard is it? It's destroying your life. You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose, like, stop. I didn't understand that this drug literally hijacked my son's brain. Now, of course, I thoroughly understand addiction as a disease and needs to be treated just as if it were MS, like my husband
Mhm.
has. My husband has MS, so we treat it, right?
Right.
I have a sister who has cancer. She's getting treatment, right? But we don't always look at addiction that way. And we tend to roll our eyes or turn our head and always think that's somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
And it is a community problem, it's a society problem, it's a city problem, county, state, national. And the
Yes.
epidemic is only getting worse.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if this will make you feel any better, but I am in recovery myself. And so that means that I have a whole lot of friends that are also in recovery. And there are times where they don't do what I want them to do.
Right.
They may go out and some of them are, they have a really difficult time staying clean for whatever reason. And there are moments where even I get frustrated, I get angry, I don't
Mhm.
understand. Why do they keep doing this to themselves? I'm in
Right.
recovery in this world, understanding firsthand what it's like to have your brain hijacked, and yet I still will go into that place of what are you doing? Why are you doing
Absolutely.
this?
It's an easy place to go to. And first, let me say congratulations to you
Thank you.
and keep it up, and how important it is for not just for yourself, but for other people struggling, that you are so passionately putting this
Mhm.
message out there. And I will just say, as a loving mother, family member, it's so easy, especially because I would look at my son and I'm like, you're so smart.
Yeah.
Like, you've succeeded already. Like, you've got all these successes in life. Why are you screwing it up? And it's easy because I'm a fixer.
Hmm.
And I thought I could fix it for him, and I thought he could fix it for himself. And
Hmm.
it just was devastating. Every time he relapsed, it literally was a kick in the gut.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand. And I am sure there are, things that I wish I hadn't said
Hmm.
through our struggles. But you know what? That's part of parenting. And what I do know is that I loved my son through it, and we did everything. We put him in every program that he ever wanted to be in. And even though my son in the end lost his battle, as you know, 4 years ago, um, I know this is going to surprise a lot of people, but I've never been angry at my son. I've never been, I feel like he did the best he could.
Yeah. And he did. And it's sad, and it's one of those things where it's like, look, we're gonna do whatever we can at the end of the day. Sometimes it's not about the actions that you take, although it's great to have that support. It's about the actions sometimes on the other person, and sometimes people just don't ever get there. And that is a really hard conversation, but it's one that I'm like, we have to talk about that piece of things. And we also
Yeah.
have to acknowledge that you did everything that you could. And there's
Mhm.
going to be places where maybe you feel, oh, I could have done this or I should have done that. And then yet it has nothing to do with anything that you did.
Well, and I don't ever feel like I could have done something different to change the fact that my son ended up having substance use disorder. I do sometimes think about those early conversations
Sure.
when it was so new to me. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so this is causing you to miss work and pawn your stuff. So just stop. So just
Yeah.
stop and move on. And I didn't understand the power of the addiction. When I really started understanding it was a couple years before we lost my son. When I, as that overbearing mother, had a key to his house, we had suspected he had a setback. And I went into his house because I thought, I'm going to go see if his TV's there.
Right.
Because that was always the telltale sign, right? When he started pawning stuff. Um, and I found syringes.
Oh.
Now, Jen, let me tell you, my son was terrified of needles,
Mm.
terrified as a grown man, was terrified. I had to go with him when he was 22 years old. He had to get stitches in his hand. And he called me at work and said, Mom, please go with me. Because he was terrified. He knew they were going to
Yeah.
give him a shot in his hand. And I left his house. I couldn't even breathe. And I called my husband. I was having almost like a panic attack. And I said, this is bad. When somebody who's terrified of syringes is intravenously now taking drugs, I knew this is beyond any control, right? This has taken over his life.
Mm-hmm.
And we of course sent him to treatment again at
Right.
that time.
Right. Of course you did. Here's
Yeah,
here's an interesting. This is one of my I won't say favorite stories. It's a sad story, but it's an interesting story. I remember the first time I checked into rehab, and as I said, the first time I checked into rehab, uh, and they go through all your stuff. And
of course.
when the girl was going through all my stuff, she asked me, she said, "Do you have any needles?" And that was mostly for her protection. She goes, "I just need to know because I don't want to like stick myself or anything like that." And I just looked at her like she had 10 heads. I was like, "Oh no, I don't like needles." And like I was so I think in that moment, both I was like, I'm scared of needles. I sounded probably maybe a little pretentious because I was like,
Yeah,
oh no, that is not me at all.
that's not me.
Right. Yeah. And she kind of scoffed at me when I said whatever I said in the way that I said it. And she goes, "Well, that's never stopped us before." And what was probably the sad thing was like a couple of years later when I relapsed, I ended up not only using needles, but I also ended up getting high with her as well.
Oh
I was, yeah,
wow.
yeah,
Oh, that gave me chills.
yeah.
That's wow. Yeah.
It was a very interesting, I guess, kind of not a
A
really
very
great,
bizarre twist of
a
irony.
very bizarre twist of irony. And I remember that story, and that particular story for me was going, Jen, you are absolutely capable of anything and everything that is out there. There is
Absolutely.
nothing that you won't be willing to do. when it comes down to it.
Never say never.
Mhm.
And, that reminds me of something I can share about my son. I think because my son, number one, ironically, never had a criminal record. He never spent a night in jail. He, I don't know why, but he would, I actually think this led to his own demise in a way, but many more than once, Clay called me from treatment and he'd say, Mom, you got to get me out of here. I'm not like these
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
I'm different, Mom. I'm different. I got this. That was his favorite thing to say to me is, Mom, I've got this. I'm
Yes.
good. And I think that my son, because he was so smart, right?
Mhm.
And my son was also really deep in his faith.
Yeah.
I think he thought he could outsmart this disease.
I'm there.
Yeah,
Sad to
you
say,
feel it.
because I grew up, in a very similar way of I didn't I grew up in a very good home. I was not around drugs. I've never seen my mom drunk, not once in my entire life. I
Wow.
had a very wonderful, I grew up, I went to private school and high school. Like it was that kind of life. College, just a really good family. We were a church going good family. In ninth grade, I'm sitting here listening to DC Talk and like Michael English. And if you don't know that, those are all the like the Christian
Uh-huh.
rap bands and rock bands, right? And so this
Yeah,
is like back in the 90s. And I was really into that. And so when it came time for me to enter in, and I do feel like I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I can hold my own in a conversation and smart enough to feel like I should be able to be smarter than this, especially because when I hear the comparison is the mother of all evils, right? And
absolutely.
I would compare myself to other people's stories where they were like, oh, yeah, me and my dad or my mom or whatever, we're all sitting around smoking crack and getting high together. And like, this is what
Yes,
I grew up with. And I don't know any different and all of this stuff. And I'm sitting here like, well, that's not my story.
that's exactly what my son experienced.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he would tell me that he's like, Mom, this I come from a different life and I've never been to jail and all I hear is
Yeah.
stories about people in jail and I've never robbed anybody and I've never done these things. And I would say, but Clay, strip all that away. You have the same problem that they have.
Yeah, and that to me is like I still have to be really mindful to not compare myself out because this is the one place where it does not matter what your upbringing is. It doesn't matter what kind of home you had. It doesn't
Absolutely
matter
not.
who your parents were. It doesn't matter if you smoked crack at the age of 6 or you didn't get into it until you were 22 years old and it just
100% addiction does
doesn't
not discriminate.
no
Addiction doesn't care
discrimination.
who you are.
No.
No discrimination. It can happen to anyone. And I have heard so many stories. What really also helped me understand addiction as a disease is I've heard so many stories of people who experimented, I mean, heavily experimented at a
Mhm.
young age with drugs, whether it's crack or even meth or cocaine, whatever. And then, they hit a certain age and they're like, I'm moving on with my life. They put it behind them and they move on, and it never affected them again.
I have no idea these people how they do it. I wish I could
How?
do it.
Right, right. And then there's people like my son, people like you who have this zero tolerance to substance that the moment you take this mind altering substance, it hijacks your brain literally.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized it's, and my son actually said to me once, Mom, this is not a fun life. Like
No,
he
he's
said,
right.
it's not like, I think that's important to say because I think some of the public who casts so much stigma and shame on addiction. I think what they're picturing are a group of people sitting around getting high, laughing, joking, and living the life of Riley, when in fact it is a physically difficult. It is, my son would get physically sick every time he would try to get off the drugs. It it is emotionally impairing. It is crushing. It's demoralizing. It's horrible. Nobody ever wakes up and says, gee, I think I'll be a drug addict. That sounds like a fun life.
Yeah, and I can tell you that when I was in the deepest parts, there was no fun being had. There was
None.
nothing. I mean, like there would be nights, and these are like the scary stories where it's like we would be so off our rocker that we would be running through the parking lot of our apartment building, swearing up and down that there was people watching us, and we would check every car in the parking lot for cameras, for all of this. Is not a fun thing to do. We did not do laundry for months and months. We stunk.
Mhm.
I mean, I gotta tell
Yeah.
you, there's no way we didn't stink. I couldn't smell myself anymore, but I was losing weight left and right.
It's a
It was
demoralizing way to have to go through
it,
your day.
and for some reason, it's like, I still, I'm like, man, I really wish that I could smoke crack like socially, right? Why would I ever want to think about that? Why would I want to do that? It's just the where it takes us.
It's
It's
where your mind goes. And
Yeah,
um, I can remember my son had moved to Wilmington at one time. So we rented his house out. We put a renter in his house, but that was the only thing my son ended up not losing was his
right.
house. We were able to save his house by renting it out. But at one time, my son was living in Wilmington. He had gone to treatment there, and
Mhm.
actually, his father lived not far from there. So he was going to start a new life. I think my son would move from town to town, and I think he always thought he could escape his addiction,
Right.
right? I'll move to Greenville. I'll move to Greensboro. I'll move to Wilmington. And he always moved thinking he could start a fresh life. But I found out that he was donating. I had not even heard, like, didn't even know you could do this. He was donating not blood, but platelets
Oh
for
yeah.
money
Yeah.
to get high.
Yeah.
Which I guess is better than stealing to get high, but it devastated me.
Yeah.
And now, when I say my son never stole from me, that doesn't mean he didn't manipulate the heck out of me to get money from me. It was always, Mom, I need food. Mom, I need,
Mhm.
something at the store. And it wasn't Venmo at the time. There was a way you could, it wasn't Western Union. It was through like Walmart. You could send
Right.
money.
Yeah.
It was kind of like Western Union. And I would send him money. And that was always devastating for me because the difficult thing when you're a mom is you never want your child to be hungry or cold or scared or and but at the same time, where do you draw that line, right, of enabling
Right.
or just mothering? And did I enable? Sure. I can't say I didn't, because there were times I gave my son money. Deep down in my soul, I knew he was lying to me
Yeah.
about what he needed that money for. But I also didn't want to lay my head on my pillow at night and think about my son being hungry.
Yeah. And that's one of the hardest. One, I don't. For me, I'm like, ugh, I hate the term enabling,
I
right?
do
Like
too.
I hate that because I think it's so, one, I think it's really vague, and two, it's like why don't we instead, like, let's look at this practically speaking, where it's like, all right, so you've done this thing. Now let's look at outcomes, right? Let's look at
Yes.
see what has actually happened in the past. So if they have ended up using the money, right, for other things other than what they tell you, or maybe they really did use it for food, but it was
Right.
because they used all their money for the drugs. And so the food, like, yes, they may, they may go hungry, but it's like, let's look at the actual outcomes of
Correct.
what you have been doing and see what's working and see what's not working, and how can we look at, like, what maybe could we do something differently to create a different outcome, instead of just going into the same, like, I'm going to give you money and you're going to, use it for this or that. And like, also balance that I don't want to lay my head down on my pillow and think about my kid being hungry, because that's just the biggest heart tug there is, of like, I
Absolutely.
can't have them laying out on the street hungry. And I'm like, but
That's right.
they, and sometimes I have to remind people, but they've kind of said that that's what they want their life to look like, right? Over and over and over again. They've been setting themselves up and making decisions that says that
Hmm.
this is what I want my life to look at. And what if we honor that instead of going,
Yeah,
what if we honor their choices? Not the tough love, but what if we actually honor them?
sure.
And that's, it can be a really difficult place to be. But I hear people, they'll say, I don't know if I, like, was it enabling, I just couldn't figure out, like, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. I just don't like, yeah, for me, I'm like, oh, can we throw enabling out of the dictionary?
Well, there's so many words we need to throw out, and I've used many
Yeah.
of them just in this
Yeah.
podcast, but just for the sake of conversation. But we try not to say like drug addict, or like we try to use substance use disorder.
Hmm.
Like one of the messages that Lisa and I are trying to get out is we have to break the stigma.
Yeah.
And a lot of these words that we use only inflate stigma and
Yeah.
only add to the stigma. And honestly, it's I get very easily, maybe not easily, I can be triggered by certain words,
Hmm.
and I absolutely will correct a complete stranger in a grocery line if there's a conversation behind me talking about junkies on the street corner. I will turn around and I will correct them, and I will say, that person is somebody's son or daughter,
Mm.
brother, sister, mother, grandchild, and that person has a disease. And, if you can't have a little bit of compassion, then just don't even acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I will call somebody out, and those words literally make my stomach
Yeah.
flitter because they're devastating.
Well, and it just, for I can only imagine, but it would probably, if I were you, it would bring me back to that moment of that deep mother instinct to say, you are not going to judge my son.
You are not going to judge my son, and you're not going to judge somebody else's son.
Right.
And that's where it takes me. And obviously, you know me, and you know I'm not shy, and I will speak up. And I do it very respectfully. I do it in a motherly way. But honestly, a lot of a lot of those conversations are because people aren't educated enough. And
Yeah.
that's why podcasts like yours are so important. And that's why these workshops that Lisa and I do, and these events that the Share Project hosts, that's what we're trying to do. We're
Yeah.
trying to get that message out there that, guess what? This isn't somebody else's problem. This isn't um, just kids, as an old expression, kids from the wrong side of the tracks, right?
Right.
This is everybody's problem. These are addiction doesn't discriminate. I tell a story in some of the I wrote a story and I've read it at some of our events, but it's called Not My Child.
Mm.
And the way the story starts, I say, I have a confession to make. There was a time in my life that I thought drug addiction only happened to other people. And I don't mean other race, religion, socioeconomic, none of that. I just mean not my child,
Not my
right?
child.
Not my child. And that is the best way that I can describe it. I tell this story of this journey with my son, and the whole time thinking, this is not my child. This is not my Clay.
Yeah.
My Clay would not have sold his iPhone to buy drugs,
Right.
right? And all the way to the very end where I'm standing over his casket and I'm saying, that's not my child,
Yeah.
but it was.
It was.
But the more we can get that message out that, listen, it can happen. And if it happened to my family and it happened to Lisa's family and all these other people that come to our grass meeting, it can happen to you. And ironically, I've met, like, you, it's almost like once you start telling your story,
Mhm.
then it's, well, my grandson or my nephew or my brother or my sister, and it's people you would never fathom, like
Mhm.
professional people with
Oh yeah.
multiple degrees. It could be anybody. But it does seem like the more we open that door, sharing our story, people are saying,
Mhm.
oh, now I have somebody that I can tell.
Yes, and I think exactly what you were just saying, when we start sharing our stories out, and it doesn't matter at what point. You may have just heard, just kind of like how you did in the beginning, that your son or daughter uh, is having a little bit of a challenge. And a lot of times, parents, families, they want to keep that very close chested. They don't want to talk about it with other people. They don't want to tell other people, yeah, had to go put my kid into rehab because of all of that stuff. And yet, there's so much going on in those dynamics that it's like you feel lonely, you feel isolated, and it's not until we can actually start removing the shame and start talking
Absolutely.
about it that all of a sudden we realize there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's so many people. I cannot tell you, I cannot go into the grocery store. And literally today, I was talking with someone, and he saw my shirt. You can't see my shirt because we're on a podcast, but he saw my shirt. It said MC. He said, "What's that?" I said, "That's my consulting business. Stands for my." He goes, "You're a consultant." And I have talked to this man several times. I was like, "Yeah," and I told him what I do. I was like, "Yeah, I work with families that have husbands with substance abuse." He goes, "Oh," he goes, "Well, how long do you have? I don't know how he knew, but how long do you have?" And I said, 15 years. And he goes, "Oh, I have 22." And I'm
Oh,
like, I
wow.
literally cannot go anywhere without
True.
finding someone that knows someone, or is that person a family member, a brother, a sister, a cousin, a whatever. And it's
Absolutely.
when we keep it close chested, we do feel like we are doing all of this alone, because we are.
And I feel like organizations like the Share Project, podcasts like yours, like we are, that's what we're doing. In fact, Share stands for spreading hope and awareness and
Yeah.
removing the epidemic stigma.
Yes.
And a lot of it also is just where we're at in our day and time. And I
Yes.
look back, I'm middle-aged, and I look back to when I was a kid and when I was growing up, family problems stayed in the family.
Culturally, that's what we're used to.
That's what we're used to. They stay within the boundaries of our home and not outside the home.
Right.
And it's a big adjustment to say publicly, I experienced this,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes time. And honestly, the very first time I shared my story publicly was in the Smoky Mountain News. There's a journalist there named Corey Valancourt. He knows me really well. He knew my story. He asked if I was comfortable sharing my story. And this was only about a year after I lost my son. And I said, absolutely. He came to my office. We talked. He wrote this wonderful article where he gently handled my son's story with such dignity. And he really opened that door for me and gave me the courage that there are kind people, right? And listen, Jen, I know there's people who judge me. I know there are. I've had it said to me. I actually had somebody ask me in a public forum, do I ever look back and wonder if I could have parented differently? Of course I do. There will always be the naysayers. There will always be those who shame, those who spread stigma. But I think I have hope, and I am inspired by the community support we have received, the support from our local politicians, from our police departments, all these organizations that come out and support every event that the Share Project puts on. It is like each time I can exhale a little bit more that I'm not being judged. But most importantly, my son's not being judged.
Correct.
And it's a fine line, because I said when my son passed away, I said, when I had to write my son's obituary, which is the hardest thing any parent can do. And my sister, of course, we're so incredibly close. She immediately came in town. She stayed with me through it all. She helped me with it all. And I remember having this conversation with her. And this is ironic. I said, I don't want my son to be remembered for how he died. I want him to be remembered for how he lived. So I made it important that everything in his celebration of life, the people that spoke was all about how Clay inspired them and all the wonderful, because my son truly was a wonderful man. But yet, ironically, I am publicly sharing almost every day how my son passed away, but it's important. And I feel like if my story and Lisa's story and our little organization can help just one person, then that's what we're here for.
Absolutely.
And if there's just one mom that says, I'm going to call them because I need somebody to talk to, that's what it's all about.
And I think, because you've talked about the Share Project. Now you guys do actual like group stuff and events.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your groups that you do.
Yeah, sure. So we actually have 2 monthly support groups. The second Tuesday of the month, we have a group called GRASP, and that stands for Grief Recovery After Substance Passing. And that's the second Tuesday of the month. The Hayward Regional Hospital was generous enough to donate us classroom space in the fitness center. So it's a very safe place to meet, and it's quiet and private. And then the third Tuesday of the month, we have Smart Recovery Friends and Family. And that group is for anyone that currently has somebody struggling with substance use disorder.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you also do events. So what kind of events do you do? I see there was an International Overdose Awareness event.
Yes, and I will tell you a sad thing about International Overdose Awareness. We have these vinyl poster boards that say the number of lives a day that have been lost to overdose. And we put these banners throughout our community. We have these banners of 150 faces of young people from across the United States. Of course, my son is on there, Lisa's son, other people from Buncombe County, Jackson County, Hayward County, but also all over the United States. And the signs say, X number of lives are lost today to overdose. These are a few of those faces. We started putting those banners and those signs out 2 years ago. And it was at that time, the national statistic was 200 lives a day Then we had to get the posters updated to 222 and then 285, and now it's 295. And last year
Yeah.
we did 222 glass jars with purple lights, because purple is the overdose color,
Mhm.
on the courthouse steps, and we'll do that again. We weren't able to get it coordinated this year, so we only did the banners this year, but people were able to submit their loved one's name, and we actually did like handwritten tags on the glass jars with purple ribbons. And
Wow.
that was a very powerful tribute. We also do an annual walk in May, and we had around 300 people this year at
Wow.
our walk. And we get different speakers. This year we had the Canton Mayor, Zeb Smathers, and we had some people who work in treatment who spoke. And then, of course, Lisa and I always speak, and people in recovery as well.
Mm.
And we try to change it up each year to get different speakers,
Yeah.
different points of view. But the important thing of our walk is my favorite event, because we also invite all these organizations from Western North Carolina. And we had, I want to say 32 or 33 organizations represented at our walk, with tables, flyers, pamphlets. Because one of the things is, I go back to where we started when my son said, "Mom, I need help." I had no idea. And our walks, of course, are open to the public. So maybe there's another mom who's going to have that conversation, and they're going to say, "Hey, wait a minute. I just saw at that
Mhm.
walk a flyer from Via Health or Sunrise or Meridian." And that might get them one step closer to finding help for their loved one.
Yeah, because and this is what's really important. Because man, let me tell you what you find out, kind of like how you did. All of a sudden, your kid comes to you and is like, "I need help." You don't know anything. The only thing you kind of really know to do is sit down and Google what to do. And let me tell you, the world of confusion
It
that
is a
you
world
will
of confusion.
dive into if you ever sit down and start asking these questions into Google, into Facebook, into social media. It's so hard to find a very clear and like trusting answer, or someone that you know has your best interest as well as your loved one's best interest at heart. So it's really
And not only
important.
that, Jen, then there's
Mhm.
the added obstacle of, do you have insurance?
Yeah. Oh
Who
gosh.
takes your insurance? Most likely you do not have insurance. And guess what? Who can pay for that posh
Yeah.
treatment center in Florida that's, $60,000 for 30 days,
Yeah.
right? So then you've got to find something that your family is in your family's budget, or
Yeah.
your loved one's insurance. It is such a difficult water to navigate. And
Mhm.
now we've got the added difficulty right now of staffing shortages.
Oh God, I
And
know.
the thing that you and I both know is, when a person makes the decision, "I'm ready. I'm
Mhm.
ready for treatment. Take me right now." And then you're told there's a 1 week wait to even get a bed.
Yeah. You
It's
have
overwhelming.
I tell people when I work with families, now normally they've either gone through this at least once, right?
Mhm.
By the time they find me, and but I'll say we need to come up with a very proactive plan, because you have about 24 hours when they come to you to get them somewhere, or they're not going.
They're not
And
going.
they're
They get
gonna.
scared. They get sick
Mhm. Mhm.
because they start detoxing.
Yeah.
And it's traumatic. It happened with us and
Mhm.
my son more than once, where like basically we had to trap him in the house
Yeah.
until a bed came open. "You're not leaving this house."
Yeah, and it's I it's one of those, like, we really the time to figure it out is not the time when they say I need help.
I'm
It's
desperate.
that is the time that says, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yes.
right now. And this is where we're going. We're getting into the car and we're going, and that's not easy to find. And that's why it's like it's really important though to have that, like, one phone call that you need to make that says we are on our way, and that's all you have for, you're already set up with everything else. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle of, like, look, when they say they need help, it's not in 5 days from now. It's not
No.
in, oh, it's 30 days until I can get in there. And
And I think it's even a little more difficult for communities like ours because we're such rural communities and
mm,
our resources are a lot more limited than in like Charlotte or
yeah,
Fayetteville or some of the bigger cities. And I am hopeful that maybe with some of the opioid settlement
mm,
funds,
yeah,
as limited as they are, it sounds like a lot of money when you hear reports, but it's broken down over snippets of money. Oh, but
yeah.
I am hopeful that maybe some of our communities can co-opt some of that money and maybe we can get more treatment in Western North Carolina.
And treatment that, to be clear, we have a lot of treatment facilities. I know because I go, you know, to
Sure.
all of them. More affordable, accessible.
Accessible, that's the key.
And it's like, look, I'll go in and they'll be like, oh, well, we either take this insurance or you can pay us 20 grand.
That's what I'm saying. And if that's
What?
not in your budget, then what are you going to do?
And sometimes
And
it's, we don't take insurance, pay us 20 grand.
pay us 20 grand. Yeah, let me write you a check.
Okay, I'll get right on. Let me go mortgage my house for someone that I have no idea this is their third treatment. I don't even know. Like, listen,
Right.
it's like, okay. And I get it. Listen, I treatment centers, you have to be sustainable. There's a
Yes.
sustainable business model. In order for
Mhm.
them to keep the doors open, they have things that they have to pay for. They have clinicians they have to pay for. There's a lot of overhead.
Absolutely.
Totally understand that. And yet it's still not accessible for families that have been through the ringer and can't afford it. It's just that, like, what are
You're
we
right.
doing? What are we doing?
It's like a hamster on a wheel. We're just
Yeah,
spinning.
we're just spinning. It's like
Mhm.
the I want to pull my hair out sometimes.
Sure.
But there are
Say,
places, if you know where to go and what to look, that there's I won't name all the names because they
no,
I'm gonna
and
miss
I
someone,
understand.
but
I
I'll
can tell
miss them.
you, I
Go ahead.
yeah, and I've learned more since Lisa and I started the Share Project.
Yeah.
I learned more about what treatment is out there than I did when my son was going through this. We knew of certain ones. I feel like my son like made his rounds at the same ones
Right.
sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because he was comfortable there.
Yeah.
Um, but um, there's treatment in Western North Carolina that I didn't even know existed.
Right. Well, and see, and here's part of the problem with sitting down to Google, right?
Yeah,
Is the first page anywhere you go to do anything is going to be um
paid
tri-
ads.
paid ads.
Yeah,
All the paid ads, all the bigger treatment, and they're not even treatment centers. They're like networks that will go send you over to the it's very confusing, right? The whole thing is confusing. So it's never going to be the nonprofit that is, that you don't have to pay. It's never going to be that on the first page.
mm-mm.
You're going to find those on like the fourth page, on the
Yes,
fifth page. And then you're going to be like, but this doesn't make any sense. And I don't know if I can trust it or whatever. And it's like, no, but I'm going to go spend money. I'm going to go spend thousands of dollars because at least then I know that they're real. And it's like, but then they're not. It's so confused. And I don't have any very clear answers. I'm at least acknowledging the level of confusion and how nice it is to have people like you, to have people like me, where it's like, listen, you have these questions and we kind of have these these answers and we can help you streamline this, because we are in the community that can go and send you in one direction versus 10, right? Like, start here. If that doesn't work, let me know. We'll go send you somewhere else. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that's really valuable for what you guys are doing with both your smart recovery and your grasp meetings, is you have people that are knowledgeable about this stuff. And so it's I know that a lot of family members who've been keeping their lives close to their chest, they have a really hard time walking into that group for the first time, in a group full of
Absolutely.
people that they don't know. One recommendation is, and I don't want to just be like, oh, you should get over that, because I think that is just too much. It's very overwhelming. And I've heard you say this, and I don't want to offer this, but it's nice to talk to someone first, to say,
Yes.
I'm going to
So,
be there, or so and so is going to be there, and they're going to meet you, or whatever. Please come. Like, we would love to have you, kind of
and
thing.
what I offer, if people, generally the way people first find us is on the internet, and they'll send a general email. The first thing I do is, of course, respond, and I give my phone number. And I
Mhm.
say, please call me. Or if they've given their phone number in their initial email, I first invite them to coffee, or I'll say, if you're comfortable, I'll come to your house. I've
Nice.
been to people's houses, I've taken people to lunch, and I make that initial contact in person.
Yes.
Um, and it's usually a grieving mom or a grieving dad. But I do want to clarify, we are not parents only. We've got spouses,
Yeah.
we've got grandparents in our group. But I will offer, I have no problem with driving to Buncombe County or
Yeah.
even Hendersonville, whatever. So I offer to make that initial contact in person, because I feel like then once they meet me and I can make them feel comfortable, then when they come to grasp
Mm.
for the first time and I'm standing in the doorway to welcome them,
Yeah.
they don't feel like a stranger in a strange land.
Absolutely. How
Yes.
valuable is that? It's almost like, I I think about it as like the first responders kind of club, that
Mhm.
initial contact, that bridge that helps make that first step a little bit less scary,
Well,
that
and the
you
other
know
side of
someone.
that, the other side is sometimes they're not ready to come to a meeting, but they
Yeah,
need someone to talk to. And I
absolutely.
always make sure I clarify that I am not a therapist. I am not educated in therapy. I am just coming as a friend. I am
Right.
coming as someone that has walked in your shoes, and I will hold your hand and let you cry. And whatever you need me to do, I'll bring you lunch. I'll do whatever. I have one lady in Buncombe County whose house I've been to. We text, we talk. She's not ready to come to a meeting, and I am okay with that.
Yeah.
I am not going to pressure anybody to come to a meeting until they're ready. Sometimes they just need an
Mhm.
ear.
Yeah, and that my whole business, it was based out of the understanding that not everyone is going to go to a meeting. Not everyone, maybe they can get there, maybe they can't. It is irrelevant to me. All I know is sometimes people just need to talk about their stuff. They just need to
Yeah.
have someone they can connect to, that's maybe not in like a group setting. And it was like, okay,
Mhm.
well, if you're not going to do the group, cool, something's got to something's got to be out there. And so, like, that for me, it was like, okay, I'm just going to create it. But you've created that group place for people that are ready for the groups. And I think it's amazing and so generous and giving that you also are willing to just be that person that they can talk to, because that's sometimes all people can handle in the beginning of, like,
Everybody has their own journey, and everybody has their own needs and their own way of handling it. And it's the same thing for the friends and family, the smart recovery.
Mm-hmm.
friends and family. The reason that was so important, and I don't leave that one because, quite frankly, I don't have somebody currently struggling.
Right.
But so I leave the grass and Lisa leads the smart recovery, even though she's experienced both. But one of the things that Lisa and the reason we were so adamant about the groups
Mm-hmm.
is because the recurring theme when she and I met, and we would talk about our own struggles, because she was really the first other person I met who walked in my shoes, right? And we talked about there not being a family resource, a
Yeah.
family support group. And like I said early in the podcast, my friends are planning weddings and births of children. And, you know, how am I going to damper that by saying, well, I need to talk to you. My son is addicted to heroin, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
I had to keep it all buried inside and within the confines of my own little family. And we wanted to build a safe space that loved ones could reach out and say, I have somebody struggling and I need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
What that's such a gift. So if I have anybody who's listening to this that wants to find you, how are they going to be able to find you?
So of course we have a website and it's the shareproject.org,
Okay.
O-R-G.
And this will be in
And
this will be a link in the show notes, by the way. So,
yes, so they can go to our website. There's a link that they can email us directly, and all of our contact information is on there. We have a 24-hour phone number, um, and we are available. We most people reach out to us initially by email, and I think that's just comfortable.
absolutely. Well, you know what? When I'm trying to connect with someone, honestly, I feel like even if they give me their phone number, if they give me their phone number and they give me their email, the truth is I'm probably going to email them.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And also on our website, we always list what workshops we're working on.
okay.
We've done the workshops is new this year. So we've only done 3 of them so far. We try to do one a quarter. We did one that was just basic, called Addiction 101.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought a specialist in who just talked about the basics of addiction. It was wonderful. We have people that work in treatment that come to our workshops. We have loved ones and sometimes just interested people in the community. But then we did one on MAT. And like I said before, like we don't advocate for any one treatment over another. We just felt the importance of educating people on
Mm-hmm.
MAT because it was something that was pretty new back when I was going through this with
Yeah.
my son. I didn't really know much about it. And then we did one on, just language and stigma,
Mm-hmm.
how words like junkie, we talked about this,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So how words can build stigma. So we're always looking for ways that we can continue to
Mm-hmm.
not just support our community, but also educate our community.
Mm, that's that is so amazing. I think that what you guys are doing and putting into this world is y'all are just a gift, seriously. So I just really want to thank you sincerely for this time, for you being willing to share. This was when I started this. People like you and Lisa were my vision of what I wanted for this
Mhm.
podcast, and so I just want to thank you so much for the willingness to be open and
Of
talk
course,
about
and I
this.
thank you for giving us the opportunity and for
Absolutely,
inviting us. Thank you. We love what
yes,
you're doing.
thank
Your
you.
podcast is wonderful.
Thank you. And you know what, guys, next time that you hear this is at some point, uh, it's going to be Lisa and Michelle together. And that I
Yes,
think is going to be such a powerful little panel of just what I know will be a wonderful conversation. If you do have someone with substance abuse. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to be a parent. You may be a brother, you may be a sister, you may be a cousin, a grandparent. It does, a spouse, especially. It doesn't matter. I think
Absolutely.
what we're saying is you are not alone, and there are people out there, there are resources out there to support and help, and you don't have to feel like you have to navigate the Google world, the social media world, all of that. There are people you can actually reach out and talk to, so please do that. And sorry, I almost called you Lisa. Michelle, thank you again, so
Yes,
much for
thank
your
you
time.
so much.
Yeah. And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want to listen to more or find more information out about this podcast and more of what I do to help families, you can go check out my page at unbreakable.boundariespodcast.com. It's full of other great podcasts just like this one and other great resources to look through. And please remember to share this podcast with others because you never know who may need to hear this. People are often hiding their battles in this arena, and sharing is a great way to provide this valuable resource to a person you may not even know who needs it. And don't forget, there is always hope, even when things seem the most hopeless.